Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Kristen August, and I'm an associate professor of psychology and director of the Health Sciences Center at Rutgers University Camden. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. This webinar is part of the Rutgers University Alumni Association's virtual event series, which offers Rutgers alumni and friends the opportunity to stay connected and hear from faculty members across the university. Today, we are honored to have with us Louis Bezich, Senior Vice President for Strategic Alliances with Cooper University Healthcare, Adjunct Professor in the Graduate Department of Public Policy and Administration, and author. Mr. Bezich is a contributing writer for phillyvoice.com and has published numerous articles in the field of public administration and health. He is a contributing author to Corporate Law Breaking and Interactive Compliance, edited by Jay Sigler and Joseph Murphy. He holds a master's degree in public policy from Rutgers University Camden, a bachelor's degree in social science from the University of Tampa, and is a graduate of Harvard University's Program for Senior Executives in State and Local Government. Crack the Code: 10 Proven Secrets That Motivate Healthy Behavior and Inspire Fulfillment in Men Over 50 is his first book. Please note, all attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of the discussion. If you have questions, please send them via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. And following the discussion, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. I will read your questions aloud to Lou, and we will get to as many questions as possible. So my first question for Lou is, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, Kristen, before I say that, let me also just start off by saying thank you to Rutgers University alumni for hosting this event. It's really a pleasure to do this. So to the book, my motivation was simple. I had a message that while it was directed through the prism of men over 50, is applicable to men and women, I think, of all ages. It reflects my lived experience, as well as ultimately what I determined, the research that I did and the data out there. And it's a message that we need a new model for healthy behavior, because the current model has failed us, I believe, and failed us miserably. This model needs to be based more so in the social sciences than the physical sciences that normally undergird medical science. It's a model that says, simply put, we need to focus on social and emotional factors. And in a word, motivation. Without the motivation, the equipment that you buy, the exercise equipment will collect dust in the basement. The membership will lapse at the gym, the sneakers will go unworn. So I think what it's all about is motivation. And when I say the current models have failed us, I was so motivated myself by the fact that when I got into healthcare, ultimately, I learned that only 3% of Americans live a healthy lifestyle. 3%. Today, upwards of 70% of our population are either classified as either obese or overweight. So that's a little bit of what motivated me to write the book.
You mentioned your lived experiences. Could you tell us a little bit more about those experiences?
Sure, and that, as I said, was a big factor that really got me stimulated to write the book. Well, when I was a senior, really to me, it started when I was a senior in college as an undergraduate. I was dealing with all the normal stuff that a senior, has to grapple with, meeting the requirements to graduate, trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And then on top of that, my parents, who had been married for 20 years and had 5 children, were getting divorced. So I found myself, under a lot of stress. And I found that when I would jog around my apartment complex where I lived, it really was a reliever. It really made me feel comfortable, cleared my head, and kind of got me through, and obviously through graduation and such, and into life. And then as a full-fledged adult, I found myself in the same kind of situation with a lot of stressful events, right? I got married. I went to graduate school at night at Rutgers in Camden. I got my first job. I was in the public sector, so I had a lot of, I was in the fishbowl, as we say. I ultimately had a stillborn son. After that, through factors that I had little control over, ended up getting divorced. Ended up remarrying. Fortunately, before I remarried, I had 2 beautiful children that are now grown, and I've got 1 grandson. So a lot of factors, normal things, and on the way to my career, all the normal things that we deal with in life. But I found that it was exercise, excuse me, that was my antidote. It's what got me through, and really helped me make it as a young dad, and ultimately dad who had his two sons living with him full time. And I knew I had to be there with them. So my motivation was to take care of those children, to be there for them. And I found that exercise and then diet was really a motivator. And what started as an antidote, by the time I got to my 50s, my late 40s and into my 50s, when the kids then went off to school, really became a passion. So what started as sort of an antidote and an outlet for the stress I was going through became a passion. And that made a big difference to me. Then finally, the last installment is I found myself a decade ago in healthcare. And I saw the statistics about men over 50, and I couldn't believe it. You would think that men who are entering into what I call, and talk in the book about, the second half of the game of life, might say to themselves, okay, I'm in the second half. I've got a lot to live for. Second careers, perhaps, retirement, grandchildren, travel, whatever it might be, exploring our interests and our passions. So maybe I should take care of myself. Do men do that at that age? No. Unfortunately, they do just the opposite. We become very sedentary, neglect our health, and consequently, we die younger than women. We have more chronic disease than women, and in my judgment, don't fulfill the opportunities, or don't take advantage of the opportunities that are with us. And that all said, the number one factor that controls our health, that impacts or influences our health, yes, it's a little bit genetics, yes, it's a little bit access to healthcare, but the number one factor is our own behavior. So in so many ways, what I found out was that what we control and have the ability to direct our own health, we fail, and we fail miserably.
Thank you for that. So I know you've surveyed and interviewed a number of men for the purpose of your book. Could you talk a little bit about the most important lesson you learned from these men? And was there anything that you learned from these men that surprised you?
I was a bit surprised at the consistency, frankly, of the responses. So I wanted to learn about, I knew that there must be other fellows out there like me who took care of themselves, who were over 50 and cared about their health. And I wanted to know what motivated them. So yes, I surveyed 1,000 healthy behaving men nationwide and asked them the simple question: where do you get your motivation? What is your secret sauce, if you will, to starting and sustaining a healthy lifestyle? And in numbers in excess of 70% in all the key measures, what they indicated was it was their social relationships. It was their spouse, it was their grandchildren, it was their professional associates, whatever. It was those social relationships that really represented meaning and purpose in their life, and a reason to live, and a reason, as you would guess, to stay healthy and to live healthy. And that was a consistent message. And then they also indicated that they incorporated their social lives into their healthy practices, meaning they would walk around the block every night with their spouse, or they would swim in the ocean with their grandchildren. Other things that incorporated both their social dynamics, their social life, and their healthy behaviors. And I found that fantastic. And it really just reinforced the message that this is as much about your social and emotional relationships as it is about the science and getting to the doctor and that type of thing.
Great. Now, you mentioned that you surveyed healthy behaving men. Could you talk a little bit about how you define that? So what were the criteria for these men to participate?
Well, the literature suggests that healthy behaviors, 5 sort of categories. One is you can't smoke, you have to wear your seatbelt, you have to have a BMI or a body mass index if you're a man under 25, between 18.5 and 24.9. You have to eat fruits and vegetables, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, and you have to exercise at least 150 minutes a week. And so if you met that criteria, those are the individuals that were incorporated into the survey.
Great. So I know your book is focused on motivation. So can you, and I know that you use the self-determination theory to guide as a guiding framework for understanding motivation to engage in these healthy behaviors. Could you talk a little bit more about why it's important to understand people's motivations in engaging in healthy behaviors like diet and exercise?
Well, because that's what keeps you going. You know, how many times have you heard about individuals have started a diet or made a New Year's resolution to live healthy, and after a few months it's gone, right? Self-determination theory is all about motivation. It's about specifically what people in your field, the psychologists, call intrinsic motivation, right? We have two kinds of motivation. I feel like I'm lecturing the professor now, but I'm going to have fun with it. Intrinsic is that what comes from inside. It's that self-motivating, I'm doing something because I enjoy doing it, or I'm feeling fulfilled by doing it. Extrinsic, the classic example is the health insurer that pays you a few bucks for your to subsidize your gym membership, right? In the hopes that you'll go to the gym if you get a few bucks. Well, again, Dr. August, as you know, that's good in the short term, but the psychologists that I've studied suggest that for the long haul, it's that intrinsic motivation that gets you going, right? And so what does that mean? In practical terms, it means you go back to those, what are the most important relationships in your life? What are those most important activities or functions that you perform or could potentially, do that will make you want to get up in the morning? And like me, get up early and have a cup of coffee, and then ultimately get into routines, rituals, and habits that are what I call the guardrails of healthy behavior. Once you get there and you have the motivation, you've got to stay there. And so what I talk about in the book a lot is, it's one thing to say, yes, okay, I've got grandchildren, or I've got a spouse, or I've got a significant other, or whatever it is that really represents that loving, caring relationship that I need, that gets me going. But how do you sustain that day in and day out, right? That's where we get into, do you have a date every Friday night with your spouse? Do you have, make sure that all the birthdays and the milestone events in the family are all taken care of? Because that's what, gives you something to look forward to. Anticipation is a great motivator. I wrote an article for Philly Voice all about the power of anticipation, looking forward to something, right? And that keeps you going, because it's not easy. It's not easy to live healthy, right? You want to pick up the cookie. You want to not run around the park or whatever the case is. But if you've got enough motivation to do it, that's the argument I present in the book, that you'll be able to sustain it. And that's what I saw in the gentleman that I surveyed.
Great. So you've touched a little bit on the role of family and friends and helping us engage in healthy behaviors and in health more generally. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? So what are some things that family and friends do that might be helpful? What are some things that they might do that might hinder us from engaging in positive behaviors? And do you think our health influences our relationships as well?
Oh, yeah. Let me start with the last point first. One of the most long-standing research efforts in this country about men is the Harvard study on adult development. You may be familiar with it. It's been going on for 85 years. They started back in, I think, 1938, tracking a group of men in the Boston area up at Harvard to see how they made out. And now actually, there's a few still living, and they're tracking their children and grandchildren, if you will. But the bottom line to this comprehensive long-term study of men is that happiness and healthiness go together. If you are happy, and optimism is also part of that. The literature is strong about optimism, but if you're happy and you're optimistic, it really lends to your health. And there is a direct relationship there. It's in all the literature, but the Harvard study really bears that out the most. But in terms of your family, in the book, I talk about a man's loving constituency, right? And that's why I say that the book is obviously geared towards 50 plus men and the people that love them, right? Because if you've got a loving constituency, they represent the power of motivation, a reason to live, and a purpose for your exercise and diet. Plus, they can be actors in that healthy lifestyle. They can, I've got stories in the book about men that have, dietary regimens with their children or their spouse and eating healthy, right? There's a story about a guy who loves to eat salmon with a buddy of his. They both like salmon, and it's part of their healthy lifestyle. But whether it's exercise or whether it's diet, your family members can and should be engaged in that healthy lifestyle. It's just like I think I use the analogy in the book about, when we have a health plan will put together a network of providers to take care of you. Well, as a guy, you want to put a network of your loving constituency together to help you with your lifestyle. You can't do it alone.
I'm going to deviate a little bit and address one of the questions in the question and answer box, because I think this is relevant. So how do you create and sustain motivation if you don't have a supportive network of family and friends? So for example, many older adults may be alone. And so what do you do in that case?
Really great question. And, one of the things that again, men start in sort of a deficit is that by nature, we're not social beings, right? Women are much more social than men are, right? We have a few buddies, perhaps, but we're not quite as engaging. So number one, we have to just kind of get over that. And now with social media and other sort of icebreakers, I think there are many more opportunities these days for older guys to become more social. But I would argue that you need to do that. You need to find, you need to build your loving constituency. If you don't have it, sort of, on your own or through your natural family relationships, then you need to build it. And it doesn't mean it's not restricted to just family members. It could be anybody else who's in the same situation. My father, who passed away back in 2017, was a very gregarious. He was the exception to the rule for men that are not quite as social. He was super social, but he had a group of guys that he would have breakfast with every day at McDonald's, like clockwork. And he had his little posse there, and they would feed off of each other and have a great old time. And I just would argue that the opportunities are out there. Does it take a little work? Yes, but the opportunities are out there.
Great, thank you. So just thinking about what you just said about your dad meeting at McDonald's. So obviously we don't want to be eating McDonald's regularly for health reasons. And
mostly coffee and maybe some eggs perhaps.
Yes. So what do we do then if we have people, family and friends, who try to hinder our behavior? So they try to get us to engage in negative health behavior. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's tough. In the book, I used an example of a guy who married with children. He led a very healthy lifestyle, was very committed to it. His wife came from what he characterized as the meat and potatoes type of a family and background. And I think I referred to him as using the skills of a United Nations diplomat in terms of his negotiation with his spouse about how we get around that. And, he just was very upfront with her that he wanted to, eat different things. And he would actually they shop separately. And he had actually a garden where he grew vegetables, and the kids loved it because they saw how, dad was doing the vegetables in the garden. So he kind of negotiated his way through that and was very diplomatic, but, came to accommodations with his spouse. So if, my point, I guess, is that if he can do it, I think we all can. It takes discipline. It really does take discipline and an openness with the people that you love to let them know that, I want to live this way for my own good and actually for their good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you focus on older men in your book, and I think you provide an argument for why, right? You mentioned that they're at higher risk for serious health issues. And I know you've talked a little bit about there's a women's health office, but there's not a corresponding men's health office. But do you think there are other groups of people that might benefit from your book other than older men? And who do you think those people might be? Absolutely.
Well, one of the reasons I argue to older men to live a healthy lifestyle, one is, of course, it's never too late. Got to get that message. It's never, ever, ever too late. All the experts will tell you that. The doctors will tell you that. But number two is we need to stop this cycle, this mentality, this cultural cycle in our society that somehow when you get to 50, it's expected to have a pot belly and neglect your health, because we're teaching the next generation. And so the next generation could certainly benefit by a new role model. I think that's incredibly important and would be incredibly motivational, I don't want my grandson to be, unhealthy. I want him to lead a healthy lifestyle. And so that's real important. And again, the other folks that have a stake in this game are the loving constituency. Again, that's why they can be of such help. So I think there's a lot of people that are stakeholders in the lives of men's health and can benefit from it. Again, I use older men because they're the poster child of the wrong model. And I'm one of them, and we love them, but I want to help them. That's the whole point of the book. But younger men, women of all ages can certainly adopt the practices and the advice I provide in the book.
Great, thank you. So speaking of other people who might benefit, can you talk a little bit about the potential practice implications of your work? So if you were to have a conversation with a healthcare provider, what would you tell them based on the information that you've learned from your project?
Well, and I have talked to healthcare providers since I work with about 700 of them here at Cooper. But one thing that's important to recognize is that slowly that the healthcare, the medicine and healthcare in general is beginning to recognize the social side of the business, meaning that they're recognizing that people need to be motivated to live healthy. I mean, one of the most frustrating things I hear from doctors are that patients who don't follow their, directives, that don't fill the, only half the people that get a prescription fill their prescription. I mean, that's crazy. But, why would you go to the doctor, do the appointment and then get a prescription but don't fill it? But it happens, right? So it's very frustrating to the giver of healthcare when the patient doesn't respond. So they're now doing things like what they call motivational interviewing at our medical school. They teach motivational interviewing, which simply means ask the patient, hey, what's important in your life? What really motivates, getting towards, as the name implies, what motivates you? So perhaps we can incorporate that into the care plan. And instead of phrasing or characterizing one's medical condition or the regimen that the doctor is prescribing in clinical terms, maybe characterize it in social terms, like, hey, John, you want to go to your granddaughter's wedding in a couple of months that you've told me about? Well, if you don't take your meds, you're not going to make it there, right? That's the classic example, go to your granddaughter's wedding, but it really is true. And then we have more sophisticated stuff. Two of our docs here, Dr. Anthony Mazzarelli and his associate, Steve Treziak, wrote a book called Compassionomics, where they've actually looked at the difference that compassionate care provides and the improved clinical outcomes that comes with a more compassionate approach, which is phenomenal. But it all comes down to the same point that there are social dynamics, whether it's healthcare or staying healthy in the first place, healthy behaviors. The social and emotional dynamics are so powerful.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I preach about when I'm teaching myself, the importance of psychosocial factors and not just treating patients like biological beings, but people who have relationships and have feelings and motivation. So
I just did a piece for Philly Voice on hugs. Hugging, which we'll hopefully get back to after the pandemic is over, is good for you. Stimulates blood flow and it has all these clinical implications for it, just as one sort of very simple example that, the social and the emotional, support the physical side of things.
So thinking bigger picture, what do you think the potential policy implications are of the work you've done and what you've found as a result of your research?
Yeah, well, with a background in public policy, I couldn't help but comment in the book about the policy implications of all this, right? And they're there front and center, and they're dramatic. Number one, I would say that I make the case that we've seen examples before where the government, and I don't like use it in heavy-handed, but public policy has helped shape behavior and done so successfully. Example, smoking, right? The number of people in this country who smoke is down from what it was 20, 25 years ago. I would argue that a good chunk of that is a conscious public policy effort. Yes, there's more regulations about the labeling of cigarettes and other things of that nature, but there have also been a lot of public service announcements, a lot of education within our schools, and a lot of impetus coming from the public sector about the downside of smoking. Right? Another behavior example is seatbelt wearing. When I was a little boy, seatbelts were just sort of optional when I was a little kid, but now they're mandated. But again, it's an example where I remember it was like, oh, a big deal to buckle up. Well, now it's second thought, And the last example I use is recycling, right? It's not a physical thing, but I remember when I was in the local government and we were going to start recycling, we said to ourselves, oh my goodness, we're going to ask people to separate their cans and their bottles and their newspaper. It'll never happen. Can't change behavior like that. Well, 20, 30 years later, it's second nature to us, right? And we've made the system even easier to comply with. So I would argue that there are things that can be done to change behavior in the right direction. So I would think going forward, there's a huge value proposition within government because who spends more money than anybody in this world on healthcare? It's the government. It's the federal government, Medicaid, Medicare, right? We know that. And so just to shave off a few percentage points in the spend overall would be a huge amount of money and a huge incentive, I think, to spend a little bit of money to begin to educate folks even more than we do now. We do it now. CDC puts out all kinds of stuff, but I'm talking about changing culture, right? You've got to change culture and change the behavior through that culture change. It's not easy, but over the long haul, it can happen. And I think with public policies that incentivize individuals to behave healthy and to really think about those social relationships, right? It's all about the why, Kristen. It's all about the why. You got to give people a reason to change their behavior, particularly when it's not easily changed. And I think the government can go a long way in messaging that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask you something that I can't remember if it was in the book, but I know we've had conversations about this.
Okay.
So I know you had mentioned that in Europe, they've done some interventions with men where they had them get involved with professional athletes, given their connection with, professional sports. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and whether you think that would be a realistic type of program to have here in the United States as well.
Yeah, fascinating case study where in Europe, where they have the same problems that we do in terms of older men who don't live a healthy lifestyle, they said to themselves, geez, what is it that is something that men can really connect to that might motivate them to live healthy? And they said, well, how about soccer, right? Football, as they call it over there. That if we somehow incorporated the passion and the energy and the commitment that these men have to their soccer teams with their health behaviors, maybe we can have a winning strategy here. And they did. And it did work. So what they did was they said to they got the football teams or the soccer teams to commit a little bit of their resources, their training facilities and their stadiums and such, and some of their staff. And they offered an opportunity for let's say a cadre of 50 men to come in and train with individuals who represented the team. And of course, when their soccer team called and said, come on in and we want you to put you through an exercise regimen and you got a diet, according to the regimen we give you, they said, yeah, I'll do that. Why? Because the soccer team said so and coach said so. And the studies show that the behaviors change and they had positive outcomes. It worked. It was a motivating factor. They finally struck a chord. They found something that these guys could relate to and would sustain their healthy behaviors. Whether it could work in this country, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my follow-up.
Yeah.
So I don't think we could have a conversation about health without talking about the pandemic.
Sure.
So do you think the pandemic has changed the way people think about health in general?
I would certainly hope so. I think so. As I've been talking about all night tonight, it's about behavior, right? And changing behavior. And the pandemic has been all about behavior change, right? We have to wear a mask. We have to socially distance, right? We have to wash our hands, right? And we have to do that over and over again, day in and day out for the last year. And so we've shown, and we've also had to change our behaviors in terms of isolation, right? And being quarantined. So we can't have that social interaction. So we've had some workarounds, right? We've used Zoom. The proliferation of the use of Zoom has been incredible, right? So we've learned how to connect to people in a different way. So it shows that when push comes to shove, if there's enough motivation that we can change, we can do it. But it's certainly also, to me, that's the silver lining on all this, is that Americans do have the ability to change. We just have to put our mind to it. It has to be a combination of both personal responsibility, right? Because so many people, we tell them, well, if you don't want to do it for yourself, wear that mask for the other people in your family, the people, that loving constituency that you love. So it's a combination of that and some government, obviously, some public intervention, right? Now, the downside and what we've learned from the pandemic is that when you're not healthy to begin with and you get COVID, right? The horrible statistic is that 76% of the people that have died from COVID have been either obese or overweight. That tells you something. That tells you that problem that I saw before the pandemic and wrote about, had a huge and negative implication and a horrible implication through the pandemic. So it's taught us a lesson there that, you know, we had a lot of good reasons to keep healthy before the pandemic. It just showed us and put it the whole situation of healthy behavior, I think, under the microscope to show us how important that is in a real sense. So that, and then to add one step beyond that, men and women, who died more? Men did, right? Men was like a little over, you know, of the 50-50 split, men were at like 54% the last time I looked at the stats. So we have more men dying from COVID than women. Why is that? Some of it is biology, there's no question about it, but some of it is behavior. Men smoke more. If you look at the Chinese studies, men smoke more, particularly over there, than women. And of course, the obesity and the lack of taking care of themselves. So a lot of lessons learned. I like to focus on the first point that we've demonstrated that we can change our behaviors if we really put our minds to it. And that's hopefully the takeaway from the whole pandemic.
Yeah, so it sounds like in addition to mask wearing and other behaviors we've had to change, it's even more important than ever to be engaging in other positive behaviors like eating a healthy diet and exercising and getting a good night's sleep, because that helps our immune system overall.
Absolutely.
So I know you've written a little bit about this in the Philly Voice, but what recommendations do you have for staying healthy physically, mentally, and socially during the pandemic, as well as just challenging times more generally? I know at the beginning you mentioned that you went through a lot of stressful experiences and exercise was your antidote to that stress, but do you have additional advice that you'd like to share?
Well, I think you take all the stuff we've talked about and sort of bundle it up. I mean, maintain your social relationships, have that, you know, to me, it all starts with a solid platform of those social relationships, those motivating relationships, right? So you want to sustain them. It may be tougher now with COVID in terms of using Zoom and other electronic media to do that, but you should still do that because that still maintains the fire in your belly. The other thing is that you need to be flexible. I've written a number of articles in Philly Voice where I've talked about the fact that, you know, I was an avid gym goer every morning, nice and early. Then my gym closed. I had to adjust. I had to run outside now, which was good while the weather was nice. And then I had to, you know, like a lot of folks, bought some gym equipment, went down to the basement, did my thing, right? And then when the weather got too cold, fortunately, the gym started to open up a little bit again with limited capacity. And because I go so early in the morning, I could get in and I could do my treadmill and sort of do my aerobic inside. But my gym changed the hours, so I couldn't get there as early. So long story short, need to be flexible, be creative. That's a really key factor to sort of get by.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
So before we go to questions, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share anything else with us that I didn't ask you about.
I think you covered everything. I guess I would just, you know, the bottom line message here is that A, it's never too late. B, it's not only about yourself if you're a guy, it's about your loving constituents. It's about the people in your life, to be literally to be around, to enjoy them and to be with them, right? So to me, there's tons of motivation. What it takes is, like anything else in this world, it takes a strategy, right? It just doesn't happen by accident. It takes strategy and commitment. And there are ways that are not that complicated that you can do that. And the other key is, I guess, one point I didn't mention is what I call micro motivators, right? Because it's all about living day in and day out and sustaining those healthy practices day in and day out. So how do you do it? The micro motivators to me are like, I love the cup of coffee I have in the morning before I go to the gym. It's quiet. I check the headlines. I check my email. It's like that 1 hour of my own time that I can kind of get myself together. Love that. I love my routine. I'm a creature of habit. So that's what those little things in life is what keeps me going every day. And I look forward to them. I love that cup of coffee and I love that little routine every morning. Everybody needs to find their own little routine that gets them through. It's the little things that really count.
Great, thank you.
So,
So I'm going to go ahead. We have quite a few questions in our Q&A, so hopefully we can get through them all. And I'm going to go through and ask you some of these questions. So talking about motivation, one question that one of the audience members had was, how do you get back into, I think, a positive frame of thinking when you've just checked out for various reasons?
Step back and look at the big picture, right? It's all about what do the next 10 years, 20 years of my life look like? What's going to happen? Do I have grandchildren, the prospect of grandchildren? Do I have the prospect of travel? Do I have the prospect of an encore career? Whatever it might be, start with that, again, that personal, emotional, social platform. Where am I going to be? Who is going to be with me? What can I do to build that network of support? And then go to your doctor, number one, if you've been checked out for a while, physically, get that checkup, go to the doctor on a regular basis, right? That's one thing men don't do. Get an annual physical, check in with your doc. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's good, right? I always tell people, men know more about the pro athletes that they follow and their cars, the shape of their cars, than they do about themselves. So take care of yourself. And then start slow. Start slow with diet and exercise, work your way up. And there's plenty of diet and exercise. I don't get into like which diet plans or exercise plans are better than others, but on the exercise side, cardio and then weight training are the fundamentals.
That was actually one of the questions from one of the audience members. So what would you think would be best in terms of standards of health? So yeah, like you said, cardio and weight training. And I would add as a gerontologist that stretching as well can be helpful.
Absolutely.
So, and obviously you need that before you do your cardio,
Yes.
right? To warm up your muscles. So
every day. Yep.
The three, yeah. There's some other additional questions about exercise. So let me get to those. Someone asked about swimming in a chlorinated pool. How do you feel about that?
I think swimming is good. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know about the pros and cons of chlorination and whether or not that's bad for you. I think it's okay from my experience, but I'm not an expert in chlorination, but swimming is a fantastic thing to do from an exercise standpoint.
Yeah, especially as we get older and it relieves the pressure from our joints, right? Mm-hmm. So that can be really helpful. So another person asked about if, for example, you break the cycle of exercising because you're exercising too hard and you get injured and then you stop exercising completely. I know a lot of older adults fear injury related to exercise. So how do you overcome those fears?
Well, I've been there and done that. Twisted my ankle, sprained my ankle not too long ago, but bounced back okay. Number one, obviously get good medical care, get yourself checked out. Do as much as you're allowed to do, right? Because you may have an injury like I had that kept me off, the treadmill for a little bit, but I could still do my strength training. And then I gradually, again, before I began to run again, I started to walk. So do as much as you're allowed to do, that the physicians allow you to do, so that you don't have that prolonged period of time when you do nothing.
So yeah, I think that addresses another question. Another question was about how people can stay motivated when they're dealing with repetitive injuries or chronic limitations, which is discouraging. Yeah. So one of the questions they had is whether you should just set smaller goals.
Yeah, look, you've got to scale back. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book a lot is as we age, we need to adjust, right? We need to amend or tailor our exercise regimen to what we physically can do. So it's okay to, slow down from the time that you used to run the mile in. It's okay to do less weight training, okay? But it's because it's better to do that than to do nothing. And there's no shame in that. That's fine. Applaud yourself for getting out there, in the first place. So that should be, hopefully get yourself motivated, but it's okay. And again, work with the professionals, whether it be a trainer or your physician or whatever, in terms of making sure you know what your limits are.
This is just my own question because when I do research, we have our, when I do interventions, we have our participants set SMART goals. Do you ever do that?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. No, you want to have goals, whether they be, again, in the book, I talk about as important as the physical goals are, right? Of how many push-ups or how many miles we're going to walk or whatever the case might be, have your social goals, right? How many, am I going to go out once a week, once a month with my wife? How often am I going to see the kids? How often are we going to see our friends? Those sorts of social goals. I talk about, mapping out a full year and starting with, we have all the kids' birthdays and all the, stuff that comes automatically. And then how can we fill in with other stuff? Because to me, that's what keeps us motivated. Yeah, like for example, tomorrow night, I'm going out to dinner with, my wife and I are going out to dinner with my son and my daughter-in-law to celebrate his birthday, right? So I've been looking forward to that all week long, right? And that, so I'm out there and I'm thinking about it, and So the more things you can do on the social side, I find, and the literature shows that it's motivating. It gives you purpose to, again, sustain that healthy lifestyle.
Great, thank you. So someone commented that they said it was a great book, and thank you, and that you're remotivating them. And they want to know, what is your greatest joy since writing your book?
To be able to talk about it in forums like this. It's one thing to write it, but you want to, again, we're social beings, and the whole book is about social interaction, right? So it fulfills me very much for people to want to listen in and ask questions. And I want to spread the word. I'm spreading the gospel of healthy behavior. And yes, I'm using the prism of 50 plus men to do it, but it applies to everybody. And that's very fulfilling.
So somebody, Gerald, asks, do you have an email subscription for men who share your perspective? And he's a 1973 graduate of Rutgers Camden, so a fellow alum.
There you go. Well, Bezich at 50plusmen.com. Go to my website, go to 50plusmen.com, the website. My email is Bezich at 50plusmen.com.
Thank you.
You'll see all the info there.
Someone wanted you to comment on the value of humor. Could you talk about that, or do you know anything about humor?
Haven't studied humor too much, but I would suggest to you that anything that is socially engaging, that brings people together, that strengthens those social relationships, can't be all that bad, right? It's clear in the literature that social relationships are important. So whatever you can do to further them, I think, is a great thing. And if it's humor, go with it.
Yeah, and I'll say from my own knowledge that humor is absolutely an effective coping mechanism. So it can really help us reduce some of the bad hormones that we release during stress, and can enhance the good ones. So yeah, humor is great. So somebody had put your website into I believe, the chat. So just so everyone knows, the 50plusmen.com.
Yes.
Other questions. So what role does lower testosterone levels play in older men's lack of motivation? Because we know testosterone levels do decrease as men age. So do you think that plays a role at all in motivation?
Sure, it doesn't help matters. But what's the antidote to that, doctor?
Exercise.
Yes. Yes, my point, right? So it can't hurt. The exercise, the diet, and the exercise, the healthy lifestyle is good for boosting testosterone.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's actually some new studies coming out on hormone replacement therapy among men, but I think they're too early, and they're too much in their infancy to make definitive conclusions. But I do agree that healthy behaviors are.
You can take a pill, or why don't you walk around the block with your significant other or whomever.
Someone mentioned, I once heard the definition of health is a continuum, and that it's basically relative as we age. What can we do mentally to adjust to the limitations of aging?
Well, number one, tell ourselves it's okay. Okay, again, I talk about it in the book. It's okay, it's expected. It can spur creativity, right? I talk about George Blanda, who was an old quarterback back in the 60s. And he played until his late 40s in the NFL, AFL, then the NFL. And he was able to do that because he transitioned from a quarterback to a kicker. I mean, the greatest example now is Tom Brady, right? He's in his 40s, just won a Super Bowl, and getting up there in age from a football NFL perspective. And look at the difference. If you saw a picture of George Blanda in his 40s and Tom Brady in his 40s, you can see Brady looks a heck of a lot better. But it's, so it's about adjustment. It's about telling yourself it's okay.
Speaking of aging, another question is, as we age and our different aspects of our cognitive functioning may decline, I'm going to put may there because I know that's not inevitable. Can our overall health, like living a healthy lifestyle, positively have an impact on memory loss and or lower the risk of developing dementia? I
believe so. Again, I'll defer to you, Dr. August, but my research says yes, absolutely. I mean, to me, that's when I talk about a value proposition, what do you get for your effort, right? What do you get for whatever dollars you spend? What do you get for your effort, And you get everything. Guys, testosterone goes up, right? The potential for cognitive decline goes down. what else gives you more energy to do all the wonderful things in life that you'd like to do. So I think that the value proposition is phenomenal. You just got to do it. Easier said than done, granted, but the benefits I think are there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's tons of evidence that physical activity can help prevent cognitive decline and help enhance cognitive functioning at any age, particularly in later life. And there's even actually more evidence that physical activity is beneficial than mental activity, although that's beneficial as well. So, and eating a healthy diet too is actually good for preventing cognitive decline.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm teaching about that right now in my class. So very.
I do my best thinking on the treadmill in the morning. Like, so because I'm still working. I'm 66 years old, but I'm still working. And what's going, and I'm competing with a lot of folks that are younger than me in our business world, but very productive.
So another question about another health behavior, sleep. So someone asks, how does the lack of sleep affect the body, and how can tired college students combat this?
Well, if you don't get enough sleep, again, Dr. August, it's not a good thing. Sleep is critical. I would suspect it gets even more critical as you get older, because everything I've read from older people, it's important, but it's important for younger people as well. So it's about the discipline, and this is what I think young college student probably does not want to hear. It's about getting to bed at a reasonable time, right? And creating some discipline and self-control. Willpower. I've got an article coming out tomorrow in Philly Voice about willpower and how challenging that is. But it really comes down to that. It's again, what do you want to, do you want to be on your game the next day, or you want to be groggy and suffering the consequences of lack of sleep? 7 hours at least.
Absolutely, yeah, and it also can boost your immune system, and it can prevent cognitive decline and enhance other cognitive functioning. So yeah, all great.
It's a common theme here.
Yes.
It's a good across the board.
So this is just a comment more than anything. So Rhonda notes that the over 50 advice applies to women as well.
Absolutely.
And women as well can find themselves without a supportive network, just like men.
Yep. No, again, it's sometimes tough, but it can make all the difference in the world.
Okay, so a few more questions here. So someone asked, what's the best way to prioritize too many pursuits of interest? I'm not sure if they mean health behaviors or if they mean just motivations, but.
Well, I would say number one, healthy stimulation, mind or body, is good. And you want to have a balance of both, right? You want to work out, but you also want to be challenged mentally and cognitively, right? Whether it's doing crossword puzzles or working, full time during a pandemic at a hospital. Trust me, that'll keep you going, right? I keep telling myself, well, this is all good for my health, even though, when my head hits the pillow at night, no problem sleeping. But no, it's about mind and body, balancing the two. And I think the call is right. It's about then prioritizing. What do you want to do? If you want to feel good about or having the energy to go out on a Friday or a Saturday night, then you've got to get the requisite sleep. You've got to pace yourself, that type of thing. But that's the fun part. If you've got choices like that, that means that's a good thing.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions, again, asking for advice. So someone mentioned that as an older worker, they're starting a new company, new job. They have feelings of anxiety of another start are strong. They work out daily, take walks, try to mix in extra fruits and vegetables, but still feel anxious when prepping to get another restart in the job market and feel challenges, perceptions as an older, experienced worker.
Right.
Any thoughts, any advice?
Yes. Well, they're not alone. Number one, the workforce is populated more and more so today with older workers. One, frankly, the literature suggests we're more reliable, right? We've got experience, and we can make a contribution, right? And so that's a good thing, so that you're not alone out there. I would say to the person who wrote in, and you're apt to be able to find other folks, perhaps your age. But think of it as an opportunity for more social engagement, an opportunity for, again, cognitive stimulation, an opportunity to be, ready for a good night's sleep when you get home at night. I think it's a great thing. Obviously, in a lot of cases, It's generated by an economic need, frankly, for a lot of people, but it's also got, again, great physical and cognitive benefits associated with it. So you'll get through it.
And I just want to add that it's normal to feel anxious
Yes.
about new experiences,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So regardless of what age we are.
Yep.
So someone asked, what are some weight loss tips for someone who's in a workout routine, but whose weight has plateaued?
Oh gosh, that's probably a good conversation to have also with your doctor. I would say, I'm the first one to acknowledge, the limits of my understanding. But look, weight loss is always a tough ordeal. A lot of it is about sticking to the regimen, that willpower that I just mentioned. But if you've got, I would always check in with the doc to see if there's anything in particular in terms of the doc and or the nutritionist. A lot of work I've done over the years now has been on, hitting the nail on the head with nutrition. It's tough sometimes because, labeling sometimes is misleading. What you think you're eating is good and it's not good. So sometimes some professional advice there can help.
Thank you. So this is a good question. So how do you think your academic study at Rutgers prepared you to write this book?
Because I studied public policy and everything, whether it's healthy behavior or healthcare, it all comes down to public policy, right? How we regulate healthcare, how we finance healthcare, and ultimately, in the case I make here, is that it's in the interest, I think, of policymakers, both their political interest as well as a policy interest, to address this problem. Look, we've had so much talk in the political and the policy arena about healthcare, right? It's usually about how do we finance it and how do we manage it and how do we make it fair and equitable. But fundamental to all that is a growing, it's slowly growing, theory about like trying to keep people healthy in the first place so you don't get sick as much, right? So we need to spend more, population health is the term that sort of, embraces that. How can we keep our populations healthy and do preventive medicine? And I think a big part of that equation in preventive medicine is giving people motivation to live healthy in the first place. That's why when I talk to my physician friends here at Cooper, it's a lot about the social side. I'm always the one who's talking about the social science of all this, because I think as we've learned through the pandemic and other situations, it's becoming more and more relevant to the conversation.
Absolutely, I would agree with you on that. So a couple other questions, again, asking for advice. So somebody had mentioned that they were in an accident and stopped exercising, and because of the pandemic, just like you, they were unable to get back and work out. They do 100 push-ups and 100 crunches every day. Would you think that's enough to bounce back, or would you have other suggestions that they might integrate into their routine?
Again, if you have the ability to get a trainer, just to get some perspective on a balanced exercise diet and exercise regimen, that would be good, because it's all about balance. It's not just strength training, it's not just lifting weights, it's not just running, it's a proper balance of both, because again, as we age, we want to keep our muscles and our physical frame and structure as fit as we can, and there's a number of ways to do that. So I would say, to me, that the key word here is balance.
Great. Okay, last question. So you talk about motivation a lot, and you talk about it as it relates to health behaviors, but this is, I think, a more general question. Someone's starting a new business and they're procrastinating, and would you suggest any sort of tricks to break through their procrastination?
Well, think of the long term. I mean, another reason why I focused on 50 plus men is that the long term is shorter than for the 20 plus men. For the 30 plus men, right? It's like the students, right? You tell them at the beginning of the semester, okay, you've got to do a term paper or something. Do they jump on it right away, or do they wait? We both know that, as in my case as a part-time professor, that and it's the same in life, right? It's unfortunate that we have to wait till we're in our 50s, 60s, like say, oh my goodness, So even though this is a business example I'm getting here, think of the long term. The longer you procrastinate, the less, you may be, the success will be delayed, right? So it's about understanding the long-term play here and then translating that into short-term action.
Hey, great. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you so much, Lou, for an informative and engaging discussion. We hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you. And thanks to Rutgers alumni. Appreciate it.